Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking down one of the most dramatic, unpredictable, and frankly mind-boggling races we've seen in recent motorsport history. We're talking about the 2026 MGTP Spanish Grand Prix Sprint at Jerez. We're going to look exclusively at this intense 12-lap MGTP class sprint, dissect the chaotic race developments, and see exactly how this Saturday afternoon completely reshaped the championship standings. So settle in, because this right here, it's a masterclass in extreme adaptability.
Okay, let's just dive right in with a question that seems, well, like a total paradox. Think about this. How does a rider crash their Ducati Desmosedici GP26, take what literally looks like a shortcut, and still manage to cross the finish line in first place? I mean, it sounds completely impossible, right? But that is exactly what Marc Marquez did in this wild 12-lap thriller. To understand how he pulled this off without getting disqualified on the spot, we first need to understand one absolutely crucial rule.
And that's the flag-to-flag rule. In MotoGP, when weather conditions change suddenly during a race, say a dry track suddenly gets hit by pouring rain, the race isn't just red flagged or stopped. Instead, riders are allowed to ride into the pit lane and physically leap onto a spare bike that their team has already prepped with wet weather tires. This rule was originally designed for safety, but in Jerez, it became the ultimate strategic weapon.
All right, let's get into the race itself with our first section, the chaotic sprint start. So when the riders lined up on the grid, the skies over the Andalusian circuit were deceptively calm. Honestly, no one could have predicted the absolute chaos that was about to unfold. We had a completely dry start, slicks on. Marc Marquez started from pole position on his Ducati GP26 after laying down this blistering qualifying time of 1 minute, 48.087 seconds. He was looking incredibly strong, lining up right alongside Johann Zarco on the Honda and Fabio Di Giannantonio. When the lights went out, Marquez took the early lead. And it looked like we were in for a pretty standard, high-speed dry sprint. But Mother Nature definitely had other plans.
Moving on to our next section, fateful half-wet conditions.
The whole situation just devolved so rapidly, basically throwing every single team's tactical playbook right out the window. We started out perfectly dry on lap 1, but by the mid-race point, a sudden, violent downpour hit the track. We entered this terrifying half-wet transition phase. Grip levels, they vanished instantly. You've got riders out there on slick tires on a soaking track, trying to figure out whether to brave it out or pit. It was during this exact window of hesitation and tactical chaos that the defining moment of the weekend actually happened.
Which brings us to our next section, the miracle at turn 13.
In the intensifying rain, Marc Marquez had actually been caught and passed by his brother, Alex Marquez. Marc was trailing him, pushing the absolute limits of his slick tires on the wet asphalt when, boom, disaster strikes. At turn 13, which is literally the very final corner of the track, he loses the front end and goes down. Now normally, a crash in a short 12-lap sprint, it's game over, your race is done. But Marquez's reaction was entirely abnormal.
The absolute key here is how Marquez reacted in the milliseconds after hitting the ground. Step 1, he somehow managed to keep the engine of his Ducati running while sliding. Step 2, because turn 13 is positioned directly before the pit lane entrance, he instantly gauged his physical distance to the pits. And step 3, rather than rejoining the racing line, he picked the bike up and executed a highly calculated shortcut straight into the pit lane entrance. I mean, it was a display of pure, split-second tactical genius.
And here is the payoff. He executes the flag-to-flag swap flawlessly, jumping straight onto his spare GP26 that's all equipped for the rain. Now, because of his lightning-fast decision to pit immediately after the crash, he was actually in a fantastic position among the riders who swapped bikes. Plus, Brad Binder, who was ahead of him, ended up crashing out. So suddenly, Marquez was back out on track in second place among the swapped bikes, sitting right behind Francesco Bagnaia. Think about that, from crashing on the asphalt to competing for the lead in the span of a single lap.
Let's look at the fallout in our next section, the brain battle that changed the rules.
As you can imagine, an unprecedented move like this doesn't happen without some immediate fallout, triggering a massive technical and political debate across the paddock. Competitors were understandably pretty frustrated. Johann Zarco explicitly voiced this, saying straight up that Marquez shouldn't win after taking a shortcut to the pits right following a fall. Zarco felt the maneuver bypassed the spirit of the track limits, and honestly, it's a totally understandable frustration from a competitor who was out there battling the exact same treacherous conditions.
But let's look at the cold hard facts here. At that exact moment, what Marquez did was perfectly legal under the existing rulebook. There were absolutely no grounds to penalize him.
However, the move was so highly scrutinized that the Grand Prix Commission immediately stepped in and updated the rulebook with strict pit lane entry rules just to stop shortcuts like this from ever happening again. Marquez literally forced the sport to rewrite its own rules on a Saturday afternoon.
Finally, let's wrap this up with our last section, race results and rankings.
So now that we've unpacked all that drama, let's look at the hard data. Marc Marquez took the sprint victory with a time of 21 minutes 25.651 seconds. He successfully cleared away from Francesco Bagnaia, who crossed the line second, just over 3 seconds behind. Franco Morbidelli rounded out the podium. Notice the machines up here. Ducati absolutely dominated those top spots, though we did see Brad Binder salvage a really hard-fought 4th place for KTM despite his own crash.
But what you don't see in that top 5 is just as important. The extreme, unpredictable conditions claim some major victims, leaving some gorgeous Aprilia RSGP 26 and KTM RC16 machines just stranded out there in the gravel traps. Championship leaders Marco Bezzecchi, Jorge Martin, Pedro Acosta, and even Alex Marquez, who led briefly before the downpour, all crashed out or failed to score. And a quick 12-lap sprint, a 0-point finish for the title leaders, is a massive opportunity for literally anyone who manages to survive the chaos.
And this is exactly how that attrition reshaped the standings. Because those top 3 riders failed to score, Marco Bezzecchi somehow retains his lead at 81 points, with Jorge Martin sitting right behind him at 77. But look at 4th place. Marc Marquez rockets up the standings to 57 points. By capitalizing on a race where his main rivals scored absolutely nothing, he closed the gap to just 24 points off the championship lead, overtaking Di Gianantonio in the process.
Which leaves us with this final thought. In modern motorsport, speed is obviously essential, but as we clearly saw at Jerez, mental agility and an intimate understanding of the rulebook can literally save an entire weekend. Marquez turned a crash into a victory through pure, ruthless tactical adaptability. What we should all take away from this is that the 2026 title fight, it won't just be won on the throttle, it's going to be won in the mind. Will this chaotic 12-lap sprint be looked back upon as the defining turning point of the 2026 championship? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll chat you next time as we continue to break down the most fascinating moments in racing.